Lakeland Currents, your public affairs program for north central Minnesota. Production funding for Lakeland Currents is made possible by Bemidji Regional Airport, serving the region with daily flights to Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. More information available at bemidjiairport.org. Closed captioning for Lakeland Currents is sponsored by Nisswa Tax Service, tax preparation for businesses and individuals. Online at nisswatax.com.
Hello again. My name is Jason Edens and I'm the host of Lakeland Currents out of our Brainerd studio just up from the Mississippi River. Thanks for joining us and thanks for your support of Lakeland Public Television. Friends, according to the United Nations, half of the world's population lives within a couple miles of fresh surface water, namely lakes and rivers. Here in the Brainerd Lakes area, we have the privilege and responsibility of living very close to the headwaters of the Mississippi River. Sacred to many, the river is a commons. The river is a community resource. And today we have the opportunity to have a conversation with several stewards of that resource. Starting several years ago, a public-private alliance here in Brainerd began to work to make the riverfront more accessible while preserving the ecological integrity of the river through town. So I'd like to welcome the Brainerd Riverfront Committee, Dawn and David. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jay. It's good to be here.
Well, first of all, just introduce yourselves and please tell me your role in this effort. We're going to get to the project particulars in a second, but what do you do with this project?
Well, I'm Don Gorham. I am the co-chair of Brainerd Riverfront, and I've been working on this. This is my 7th year of working on the project.
Okay. David?
David Chansky, I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Brainerd. My role in the project is kind of be the city's liaison to the Riverfront Committee as they move forward and try to get this project to become a reality.
So your project is very ambitious and we're going to get to it very quickly, but before we look forward, it's only appropriate that we take a look back. So I'm curious, what's the cultural and historical significance of the river in town? How long have people been living here? And what role did the river play in the origin story of Brainerd?
It really, it is why Brainerd is Brainerd. When the Northern Pacific Railroad came through in about 1870, they needed a place to put a bridge across. They looked originally south to the settlement of Crow Wing, and the settlement of Crow Wing, they wanted a few dollars for it. And the railroad thought maybe we can find a place that might be a little less expensive, and they found a place with wonderful bluffs. That's why they chose Brainerd. That's why the Northern Pacific crossed the river in Brainerd, and that's the origin of the town. The river was a central part early on. There was a steamboat landing that was active by the 1880s. There was daily service to towns like Aiken up the river. I think it cost 25 cents to take the steamboat up the river. And that era lasted maybe about 20 years or so until the river was eventually dammed. The river was dammed for the paper mill industry, and that kind of changed it, and that is, I think, when Brainerd began to turn away from the river, began to see itself as a railroad town, and really not as a river town.
So even before railroads and even before steamboats, there were in fact folks living in this community, correct?
Well, they were living south in Crow Wing. Crow Wing is, that's the longest continuous establishment in this area, is the village of Crow Wing. So Brainerd really was an invention of the railroad. In fact, Brainerd was the maiden name of the president of the railroad, and his wife, that was her maiden name, was Brainerd. And so we are a railroad creation.
And how about the Ojibwe? Were the Ojibwe living in what's today Brainerd long before that?
I don't know if they were living here, but certainly they were living in the Gull Lake area. Certainly they were living in the area that we know as Hole in the Day Bay. The history goes back, and they were trading, they were working with the French. The village of Crow Wing is interesting because that's where Indians lived and the French lived together. And so that's where a lot of the early contact was through Crow Wing.
So your project, as I was reading through some of your documents on the website, it's incredibly ambitious. It's a heavy lift. So give us a big picture summary of what you're trying to do with this riverfront revitalization, David.
So really what we're trying to do, as Don said, is turn the community back to the river. Recently, the city, over the last 2 years, went through updating the city's comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan looks at the city as a whole, not just the organization, and says, where do we want to be as a community in 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And as part of that process, there's a lot of community engagement, talking to different members of the community saying, what do you see Brainerd? What is your vision of Brainerd? Where are we now? Where do you want to be? And almost everyone that we talked to said, Mississippi River. We want to focus on the Mississippi River. Because if you look at town and specifically the corporate limits of Brainerd, there's not a lot of opportunities for the general public to interact with the Mississippi River. Most of the shoreline along the Mississippi River is privately owned. And so this location that the Riverfront Committee is working on to create a trailhead, a space for the community, is one of those few areas along the river that is currently it's undeveloped. It's just being used as a parking lot right now and is publicly owned.
So your Instagram is incredible, by the way. But for those who haven't seen it or haven't read through your website, brainerdriverfront.org, can you paint a picture for us of what it would look like if I were to paddle down the river, say 5-10 years from now, starting upstream, of course, through the 2-mile stretch upon which your efforts are focused? What does it look like? What am I going to see that I don't see today?
You're going to see overlooks. You're going to as you arrive at the Mississippi Landing Trailhead, you'll see an overlook. You'll see trails. You'll see the amphitheater. You'll see an improved canoe and kayak landing site that wasn't there in the past. And hopefully you'll see life along the river that you didn't see in the past. And you'll see, a lot of this is demystifying the river and getting access to the river. And so you won't be the only one on the river.
Excellent. So I think I mentioned that I actually tried to read through all your planning documents. It was a little bit difficult, but nowhere did I see a budget. So obviously one of the questions that I was eager to ask is, how much is this going to cost and who's going to pay for it?
And Jason, that's a good question. And that's something the Riverfront Committee has really been spending, especially all of 2019, preparing to answer. In 2019, the city of Brainerd was awarded a grant through the National Park Service. It's a technical assistance grant. Didn't cost any money. What it is the National Park Service is providing staff to come up through the city. Again, the city is holding the grant, but then they're working with the Riverfront Committee on trying to plan what do we want this site to look at. To figure out how much it's going to cost, we have to know what we want. So they spent the last year creating kind of a plan. This is what we would like to see, or the committee would like to see this riverfront site look like. And now, actually, right now, we have an engineering firm, SEH, is working on cost estimating this site. So now that the committee is created, this is what, here's our plan, this is what we want to look at. Now it's to the stage of cost estimating so that in this 2020 year, we can start looking at gathering funds. So the question of where the fund's going to come from. I think it's the goal of this committee is to have this site really not come from necessarily taxpayers of Brainerd. The idea here is to go out, to get grant funding, to get local people to contribute to create this site and really kind of make this site a community effort and a site that is it's kind of the entire community is bought into this site, and it's not just the cities putting it on the tax levy or bonding and building it.
So I was going to ask you about community buy-in. So since you've already brought that up, obviously the two of you are all in. What about the community? To what extent do you have community buy-in? Is this something that most folks in and around Brainerd are fired up about?
Well, the National Park Service, really working with Holly Larson of the National Park Service was really a turning point for us when we began to work with her. She's worked through with other communities through similar projects like this, and she breaks it down to 3 parts: designing, engaging, and funding. And what the essence of it is the committee representing the community is doing all 3 of those steps. We're involving the community in design. We're engaging the community through public events that we've done. We've done a float on the river with canoes and kayaks. We've done events like this. Any event on the river, we attempt to attend and be there and tell people about our work and what we are doing. And then, which leads us to the funding aspect of it. And that's where we're looking to engage the community as well. So again, they have a sense of ownership that they are part of this. So really all 3 of those parts, the design, the engagement, and the funding, those are the 3 essentials. And we've really completed the first 2 and done a lot of work engaging community, both on individual levels, whether it be through a community survey that we conducted, whether again be through meetings, and also working with community organizations too. We're looking to partner with similar organizations, whether it be the YMCA, Brainerd Community Action, and a lot of the user groups in the area. And by doing this, we are creating buy-in. People, when you bring up the riverfront, they're like, oh yeah, I've heard of that. It's we're getting there.
So I don't want to put you on the spot, but it sounds like we don't exactly know yet the scope of work or how much it's going to cost? Or we have an idea of what the scope of work is, but we don't know how much it's going to cost.
We have an idea what the scope of work is.
Okay.
The committee's really put together this plan, this concept of what they want the riverfront to be. As Don alluded to, there's set pieces of it being an amphitheater where events can be held, anything from a play, concerts, or just other things, events to be held at this amphitheater. Outdoor learning spaces where people can gather and have someone from ISD 181 can come bring in their class and out in nature with the Mississippi River right there teach a class. We want people to be able to interact with the river, be able to actually go down and either stand in the river, launch their kayak or canoe into the river. We also want plenty of nice green space where people can just gather and enjoy themselves, maybe have a picnic, as well as nice promenade that kind of cuts down the middle of it, built to a level that you could easily get things like food trucks or other vendors down there if you wanted to do vendors to support, say, like a concert in the park, or if you wanted to do a farmer's market or things like that down there. So that concept's been created. So now, as I said before, it's in that level of kind of pass it over to some engineers to say, how much do you think this is going to cost? So then in this year, as we're going and asking for funding, we know how much we need to ask for overall, but also how much individual items within that plan are going to cost as well.
Can you tell me yet how much you're going to be asking for?
We have a guess where we're getting at. We had a meeting that was really interesting a couple weeks ago. We actually with a team of engineers from SEH, and we began to go through item by item. Do we look at cobblestone? Do we do cobblestone? Do we do concrete? What materials are we going to look at? So we're beginning to finally start to make those tough choices of what can be in a budget, what can't be in a budget. I'll say this, that when we looked at this a few years ago, we had a notion of a $3 to $4 million project. At this point, we are eagerly awaiting what we're going to hear back from the engineers on this, and so we can actually have the number.
What about timeline? Actually, before you answer that question, maybe you could answer it in the following way. Don, you're very well known throughout the region as being an outstanding musician, so tell me, when can we expect to see you perform at the amphitheater?
2022?
2022.
We had hoped on 2021. At one point, 5-6 years ago, we picked 2021. And not randomly. 2021 is the sesquicentennial of Brainerd, the 150th anniversary. So we've kind of had that out there as a goal. Are we going to meet that? No. 2022, 2023, yeah, that's getting very realistic at this point.
Well, that's exciting. So is there going to be a point in time in which you're going to break ground officially and kind of inaugurate the project?
So that's a good question. So as part of this whole project, obviously we've got to figure out how much it's going to cost and then get that funding. I think one of the things that in a most recent meeting that the Riverfront Committee had with stakeholders from throughout the community was that discussion of, if this project's going to cost $3 million, unless we get someone who wants to come and write the check for $3 million, how do we want to make this happen? Because it might not happen in one season. So we're looking at potentially in 2020, depending on how funding comes in, starting that process. For those that aren't familiar with the site, right now the site's a parking lot. So that starts with, at first getting all that old gravel and stuff out there and rehabbing that land back to kind of a natural environment. That's just step one. And then slowly from there, making those priority decisions and saying, okay, we have this amount of money now. What's first? Is it the kayak launch? Is it the outdoor learning space? Is it an overlook? And then as the funding comes in, just keep checking off the boxes until we get to a point where hopefully in the next 2 to 3 years, we have the site fully developed as planned.
So you guys have done a ton of work. It's obvious through your website and all the documents that you've created. But when you say it's a multi-phased approach, what's phase one? Is it the planning you've already done, or is it the amphitheater at first? What's the first thing that the citizens will see in Brainerd on the riverfront?
I think the first thing, it'll be like what David will see, that we'll begin to actually see some physical changes on there. We had a meeting with the City Council this week, and the City Council approved the idea of looking at the right-of-way improvements along East River Road, looking at as a separate civil engineering project, and have agreed to provide estimates for this. So the first steps are happening. We'll start getting hard numbers. And again, hopefully the first thing you'll see is that old, awful parking lot being removed. And then we can, there are other efforts that we can do pre-construction, such as addressing invasive species. That area is rich, for better or worse, with buckthorn. And we can start to do simple steps like this to begin to rehab the site, to heal the site, frankly. So it's ready for the next step, ready to be a park.
That's an interesting choice of words. So you said that someone could step up and write a $3 million check. Is it possible for members of the community to actually support this project financially?
Absolutely. At this point, we don't. The Riverfront Committee does have their own funds. That currently is being under the umbrella of the Community Action, so they do actually have their own account. So people can absolutely provide funds to the Riverfront Committee towards this project. Absolutely.
And that'll be earmarked for the.
They can contact the city. They can contact myself. And we would gladly put them in touch with Community Action, our financial agent, and we'd love to start the process.
Okay. Well, are there going to be any losers from this effort? It sounds very exciting. Everything, on paper looks incredible. Are there any adverse effects to property owners in close proximity to some of the work?
I would say no. Right now, as I said before, this site is publicly owned. About 98% of 95% of this property is owned by the city of Brainerd. A little sliver is owned by ISD 181. They've been involved throughout this process, are in full support of this process. And if anything, what we see is this is going to be a benefit to pretty much every property owner along that section of the river. Just to the north, the North Star Apartments, great opportunity for those people. Again, more opportunity to get out. And they have the river in their backyard, but probably might not be able to see it or even touch it. Mm-hmm. And as well as part of this process, part of this project is also to develop a trail. Right now, the Riverfront Committee is focusing on the trailhead site, but SEH is also currently working on a feasibility study to develop a trail from that site north to Highway 210 along the bluff of the river. So eventually, that's in the process right now. Hopefully, we'll have the results of that study in about March, and then they'll start planning on that piece as well, trying to get a trail that goes all along there, connecting also those properties to the trailhead site and all the way up to Washington. Again, try to also create more non-motorized, we call it non-motorized mobility throughout the community as well, allowing people to go up along the river from 210 south, maybe even get down to Kiwanis and Rotary Parks as well.
Okay. Oh, please, Don.
The one thing I want to add to this is that it's really important to us that we're not just creating a standalone product for recreation to visit to say, oh yes, I went there. We want to create infrastructure that works for our city, that helps address barriers that we have. And again, non-motorized transportation to make it easier to move through the city without a vehicle. One of the biggest obstacles in our town is Washington Street, and really stops a lot of north-south movement in the town. And the trail eventually will reach Washington Street, and there is a reconstruction proposed, I think 2025. The Department of Transportation is looking at a rebuild on Washington Street. And we certainly hope that getting people safely, whether it be underneath or whether it be over Washington Street, will be included in this. And again, these are ways that our project can help just make it a more livable town.
Yeah, a lot of your planning documents actually include some development along Washington and some modifications. Is that part of your long-range goals, is to actually address some of that, or are you focused really on the riverfront?
Right now, on the riverfront, but again, that long term of, yes, trying to connect mobility to all around the community. As Don said, the Department of Transportation is in the planning stages right now of constructing a full reconstruction of Highway 210 throughout the city of Brainerd in roughly 2025. The city is an active member of that planning process, and one of the city's goals to the Department of Transportation is what Don just said, being able to connect especially the north side of the city to the south side of the city, make it much safer for people to get across from the north side to the south side. 210's a huge barrier. It's not very pedestrian friendly. But part of that being at that section along the river, trying to create a way that we can get this trail across the river, across 210, so maybe underneath the bridge, and so that MnDOT knows that, so as they're planning and figuring out what are we going to do with 210, what are we going to do with that bridge right there, they can take into mind the city would also like a pedestrian overpass or underpass. How can we potentially accommodate that?
What's the physical boundary of the work that you're doing? I kept reading about a 2-mile stretch. Is it from Washington to...
There's a couple different perspectives here.
Okay.
The long-term perspective is the entire stretch. The Brainerd has, if you count both sides, we have 10 miles of shoreline. The original charge that was given to the Partnership Committee in 2014 by the City Council was to connect Brainerd's neighborhoods to the river. That is the long-term project, is to create things on both sides, the east and west side, that will create access to the river and bring the river in. The short-term project right now is the area primarily from Mississippi Landing, which is just south of the North Star Apartments, up to Washington Street. So that is our focus right now. But it's when this project is completed, our work will continue.
That's a much more holistic description. Can you say that again? So the charge is to connect Brainerd's neighborhoods to the river.
Yes.
So that's more than 2 miles, certainly.
It's certainly more than 2 miles. And Brainerd's largest neighborhood is Northeast Brainerd. That's the largest neighborhood in terms of where the majority of people live. And in Northeast Brainerd, again, there's access to the river if you're willing to cut across somebody's property, if you're willing to scramble down a steep hill. Oh, sure, there's access to the river. But it's not orderly, it's not welcoming, it doesn't bring you to the river. And so that would be an opportunity there. I live on the west side of Brainerd, and I would love to see opportunities to connect the west side to the river. And these are things, too, that we can address, like we have a real transportation gap between like CLC over on the west side of Brainerd up to the Walgreens drugstore. Just this morning, I saw a family with a stroller and 3 kids, and there they were right down the middle of the road. There's nowhere to go. So a win-win is waiting, where there's a trail along Southwest 4th Street that is going to address the transportation, and at the same time give a wonderful overlook of the river, and again connect the neighborhood to the river.
So assuming funding is secured, is this project a foregone conclusion? Are there any regulatory barriers or any hurdles to overcome other than funding?
So at this point, the committee is in the final stages of that planning, getting the cost estimates. Their next steps is they'll be going before the Brainerd Parks Board as well as the Brainerd City Council to get their formal, approval of the plan. The Parks Board and the City Council have already seen the plan throughout this process, so they aren't foreign to it. They've all said that they are in support of it. And that this going before the Park Board and the City Council, really what this is to do is to give their stamp of approval, so when we go out for funding, we can say there is local support. The local governing body fully supports this project.
And we're also, of course, working with the DNR is well aware of what we're doing, and they're one of our partners. The Mississippi Headwaters Board, Tim Terrell, Barry is also a part of what we're doing. And so there are many eyes on this project. A lot of people are very excited about it.
So you have local citizen leaders like yourself, you have the City Council, you have the DNR, you even have the National Park Service engaged in this conversation. That's a huge continuum of stakeholders. Tell me, how did you assemble this public-private alliance, with an entity including the National Park Service, for example, and what role might they play in the future, if any?
Well, a lot of this will come through some of the support that we've had through the community. We received a grant from the Community Foundation. I believe it was about a $100,000 grant in 2015 to support our work. The first 2 years, the project went to SEH, the engineering group. They had a very large project that didn't quite get off the ground. But one of the important things they did is Ashley Kaiserschott of Sourcewell was assigned as our coordinator, and that has meant everything to us as citizens involved in this, to have a full, even if it was just, I can't remember what it was, 10 hours a week or whatever it was, we had somebody who was doing our work and who could help us. And that's how we found the National Park Service. Ashley was put together the application, and we were able to engage with the National Park Service. So it's through community support that we've been able to do this. And the biggest thing too is we've drawn in so many different parts of the city, whether it be the Parks Department, Engineering Department, Planning Department like this, and that has helped. As far as going in the future with the National Park Service, They've, I think, agreed to work with us again in 2020, and so we still have them on board to help us work on things and designing things. They are sticklers on community engagement. They are terrific. Whatever plan we propose, they're like, you need to do more. And it's good to have somebody like that, again, that they've done many other projects, and they can really help us along.
In addition to that, we've also had some engagement on a state level as well. We've had the city's had the opportunity to present this project to the Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission, to the Legacy at the state level. In this past fall, I had an opportunity to make a presentation on a bus tour with the House Capital Fund Committee. So we've had a lot of engagement even at the state level with legislators and other entities, the DNR, MnDOT as well, so they also know what our project is and what's going on.
Would you describe this as a grassroots endeavor or more of a top-down endeavor? Is this something that the city is, say, mandating, or is this coming from the people? And how have you sourced input from the community?
I'll gladly answer that question. Absolutely. It's, I think in our first couple of years, we were, frankly, maybe a little heavy on the, from the top down the first couple of years. And I think as members of the committees, sometimes we didn't quite feel engaged in the process. We were sort of surprised sometimes by some of the turns along the way. And that really has changed in the last couple of years. We really have become, the ideas are generated from the committee. And what's neat is we have a core, we have 10 members of our committee, and the core really is unchanged. A few people have joined, but in other words, people have continued to work and continued to show up at meetings and to represent. And that has given us the chance to have roots, to grow roots in the community and have this project connected. So really at this point, it is a bottom-up project. It really has changed from where it was in 2015. And that's been good, really positive.
When I was reading BrainerdRiverfront.org, I got really pumped. So I'm sure a lot of our viewers will be asking the same question that I asked, which is, how can I get involved? How can I help?
I'll answer that. What they can get involved with is our meetings are public meetings. We love to, and we often have non-committee members at the meetings, and that's great. We welcome everybody. We meet the first Thursday of each month from 3 to 5. We meet at the CTC room at the Brainerd Area Chamber of Commerce. We'd love to get you involved, your opinions through, again, you can contact us through our website or through our social media accounts, and we'd like to get you involved. One of the things we'd like to do is we find people with specific skills that can do things for us, whether it be people that specialize in funding aspects. We have, I think you interviewed Jennifer from the Food Co-op last week. Well, she is part of our group as well. And so she's an example of somebody that we can use that has experience in doing fundraising and grassroots approach. And if we have other people out there that have these skills, we'd love to hear from them and love to have them part of our project.
Excellent. Well, my last question is, can you guys come back in about a year and give us an update on this? Is obviously a very heavy lift for the community, so I'd like to invite you back. Can I count on you to come back and give us an update?
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
You got it. We'll be here.
Well, thank you both for your work to the community. This is a really important endeavor, and I just want to thank you and your colleagues for all your hard work.
It's our pleasure.
And I want to thank all of you for joining us once again. My name is Jason Edens, and this has been Lakeland Currents. What's currently on your mind? Send us your ideas for future topics, and I look forward to seeing you next time.